The Forgotten Asylum. The night had barely settled when the five of them crossed the rusted gates, their heavy chains hanging limply on the iron frame, as though they hadn't truly kept anyone out in years. The old Ashcroft Psychiatric Hospital loomed ahead, its skeletal windows gazing blankly over the withered landscape. Behind them, the last traces of the sun bled into a deep purple horizon, leaving only the pale glow of their flashlights to slice through the growing darkness. It had started as a dare. An idea born from late-night talks and urban legend videos. Jake had been the first to suggest it, digging up the old blueprints online, showing the group how the hospital was once notorious for its experimental treatments. "They say people went missing," he'd whispered, leaning closer. "Not escaped. Disappeared. Whole wards sealed off." Now, here they were. Cold breath visible in the damp air. The silence was too loud, pressing against their eardrums in a way that felt unnatural, as if the building itself were holding its breath, waiting. Jake led the way, his phone recording everything for their planned documentary. Ashley followed close, clutching her flashlight with both hands, while Mark and Jenna whispered nervously behind. The fifth, Ryan, trailed slightly apart, his face unreadable beneath the flickering light. The entrance was just as they'd seen in the photos, double doors splintered at the edges, the glass shattered long ago. Inside, decay greeted them with open arms. Mold bloomed along the cracked walls. Peeling paint curled like dead skin. But worse than the sight was the smell, damp, old wood, and something else, sharp and metallic, like rust or blood. They moved deeper. Hallways stretched impossibly long, the beam of their light struggling to pierce the gloom. Old patient files scattered across the floor, damp and unreadable, names blurring into stains. Strange symbols scratched into the plaster. Words that felt older than the building itself. A sound echoed. A sharp, metallic click. "Did you hear that?" Jenna whispered, clutching Mark's arm. Jake laughed, though it felt forced. "Probably the pipes. This place is ancient. Come on, the records room should be down here. That's where they kept the..." The door at the end of the hall swung open. Not creaked. Swung. The five froze. Light trembled in their hands. Jake stepped forward. "Hello?" Silence. Then, barely audible, the scuff of footsteps from somewhere above them. "Guys, maybe we should," Ashley began, but Jake had already reached the door. Beyond it lay what was once the records room, though the shelves now sat mostly empty, papers shredded and yellowed with time. On the far wall, however, something caught their attention. A single photograph, pinned by a rusted scalpel. It showed a group of patients in outdated hospital gowns, staring blankly at the camera. But behind them, just barely visible in the shadows, stood a figure in a long white coat. His face was obscured, blurred as though the film itself had rejected his presence. Ryan spoke for the first time. "We need to leave. Now." But before they could, the door slammed shut behind them with a force that shook the walls. The light from their flashlights flickered wildly, and a sudden chill swept through the room. The photograph trembled as though caught in a breeze, yet the air was deathly still. Mark tugged at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Jenna screamed as the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway they'd just left. Jake's phone buzzed in his hand. The screen glitched, distorting their reflections. A low voice, crackling with static, whispered words that made no sense. "Stay with us." Ryan grabbed a rusted chair leg from the floor and wedged it against the door. "We need to find another way out." The symbols on the walls seemed to shift under the flickering light. An old filing cabinet in the corner rattled violently. Then, the same low voice echoed again, clearer this time. "You opened the door. Now you can't leave." Suddenly, the floor beneath them creaked, and a hidden trapdoor in the corner shifted slightly, revealing a dark void below. Jake glanced at the others, then moved cautiously towards it. The trapdoor yawned open, revealing a steep staircase leading down into darkness. A cold draft seeped upward, carrying a whisper that seemed to call each of their names. Ryan shook his head. This is insane. We shouldn't go down there. Jake met his gaze. We don't have a choice. With a deep breath, they descended, one by one, into the abyss. The staircase seemed endless, spiraling deeper than any ordinary basement should. Each step groaned beneath their weight, the damp air thickening with every downward motion. The walls were no longer concrete but rough stone, slick with moisture, as if the building itself was sweating. The five moved cautiously, their flashlights trembling, casting jagged shadows that seemed to shift just out of focus. Jake broke the silence, voice hushed but firm. Stay close. No splitting up. Ashley clung to his arm, her breath shallow. Behind them, Mark whispered, "This doesn't make sense. This place shouldn't go this deep." Ryan, lagging at the back, whispered under his breath. "This isn't part of the hospital. This is something older." The air grew colder. Suddenly, the stone steps gave way to packed earth. A long, low-ceilinged corridor stretched ahead, vanishing into the darkness. Faint markings were carved into the walls, symbols that felt ancient, wrong, pulsating in the dim light. And then, they saw it. At the end of the corridor, a wooden door. Heavy. Old. Chains dangled loosely across it, rusted and broken, as if something had been released long ago. Jake hesitated, then stepped forward, his camera still recording. He reached for the handle. A metallic clang echoed from behind them. They all turned sharply. The trapdoor at the top of the staircase had slammed shut. Jenna was the first to react, running back up the stairs, banging her fists on the door. "No! Let us out! Let us out!" No response. Only the sound of breathing. But it wasn't theirs. From the corridor ahead, a sound began to rise. A low, rhythmic scratching sound. Like nails dragging along stone. Jake aimed his flashlight down the corridor just as the door at the far end began to shift. Not open. Breathe. The wood flexed inward, as though something on the other side was pressing against it. Ryan spoke, voice shaking. We need to go back up. Find another way. This is wrong." But it was too late. The door snapped open with a deafening crack, and the darkness beyond it pulsed. A figure stepped forward. Pale. Thin. Barefoot. Hospital gown hanging limply. Eyes glazed, lips moving without sound. Jake raised the camera, but the screen distorted, the image twisting. The figure moved closer, and now they could hear it. A whisper. "It hurts, help me, please." Ashley backed away, trembling. Oh my God, oh my God. But then the figure's face changed. The blank expression shifted, twisting into something unnatural. Lips curling back, revealing jagged, uneven teeth. Its voice deepened. "You came too far." The lights cut out. Total darkness. And then the screaming started. The screaming echoed in the blackness, a sound raw and ragged, bouncing off the damp stone walls until it became impossible to tell whose voice it was. Flashlights flickered desperately as they scrambled to regain control, beams cutting in and out like dying fireflies. Ryan's voice pierced the chaos. "Jake! Where are you?" A harsh scraping noise erupted from the corridor, the sound of nails dragging against stone. Closer this time. The pale figure had vanished, but the air felt heavier, pressing on their chests like invisible hands. Jake's flashlight sputtered back to life. He stood near the wooden door, the lens of his camera cracked, the screen a static blur. His face was pale, but his eyes were wide with something worse than fear, recognition. "We're not alone." Ashley clung to his arm, sobbing, while Mark and Jenna backed toward the staircase, their flashlights still malfunctioning. Then came the voice again. "You opened the door." But this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was coming from the walls. The stone itself seemed to vibrate with the sound, low and guttural, like something ancient had awoken. Mark grabbed Jenna's hand. "We're leaving. Now." But as they turned back toward the stairs, the passage had changed. The staircase was gone. Only a long, endless corridor stretched before them, the stone merging, shifting as though the asylum was alive, sealing them in. "No, no, no. It was just here." Jenna's voice cracked. The lights faltered again. And in the brief pulses of darkness, they saw them, figures lining the corridor now. Dozens. Pale, motionless, their faces half-shadowed, indistinct. Not real. Not human. But watching. Jake raised his camera again, its screen hissing with static. "Stay together. Nobody runs. We go forward." Ryan shook his head violently. "Forward? Jake, are you out of your mind? We go back." Jake turned the camera to him, and for a brief, chilling moment, his face seemed distorted on the screen. "There is no back." And suddenly, the whisper returned, right behind them. A guttural, rasping breath. Ashley spun, her flashlight flickering, and caught it, just a glimpse. A figure at the edge of the corridor. Not pale like the others. This one was darker, gaunt, its face obscured in shadow, but the eyes, black voids, reflecting nothing, locked onto hers. The figure didn't move. It shifted. Closer. "Ashley, run!" Jake shouted, but it was too late. The figure lunged, not with speed but a sudden, unnatural jerk, and the flashlight shattered as Ashley screamed. The lights died completely. And everything went silent. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the sound of breathing. Then, slowly, a single light returned, Jake's flashlight, barely a dim glow. Ashley was gone. The dim beam of Jake's flashlight wavered, trembling in his unsteady grip. The silence was deafening. Ashley was gone, her last scream still echoing in his ears, yet the corridor remained unnaturally still. No footsteps. No breath. Just gone. Where is she?" Jenna's voice cracked, barely a whisper. Ryan clenched his fists. "We're not staying here to find out." But Jake's face was pale, haunted. His flashlight's beam scanned the darkness, lingering on the spot where Ashley had vanished. "She's still here." His voice was hollow, mechanical. "I can feel it." Suddenly, the walls trembled with a deep, resonant thrum, like the heartbeat of the building itself. From deeper within the corridor came the sound of wet footsteps, slow, deliberate. The figures in the shadows hadn't moved. But now, the black void beyond them seemed to pulse. And then, a whisper. Her whisper. "Jake, help me." Ashley's voice. Faint. Distant. Twisting, as though pulled apart and stitched back together. Mark shook his head violently. "It's a trick. It's not her." But Jake had already begun moving forward, the flashlight barely illuminating his path. The others hesitated, the cold seeping deeper into their bones as the air thickened with damp rot. Ryan hissed, "We can't just." A scream. Not Ashley's this time. From somewhere above. The ceiling shifted. Or, no. The stone shifted. Faces pressing outward from it, eyes wide, mouths open in silent agony. They weren't reflections. They were inside. Jake's flashlight flickered, and in that moment of darkness, something lunged. A pale arm, Ashley's arm, reached from the shadows, fingers clawing the air. Jake dropped the flashlight, grabbing her wrist. "I've got you. Hold on." But as he pulled, her face emerged, distorted, unnatural. Her mouth twisted too wide. Eyes blackened voids. A mockery of her. Not Ashley. The thing snarled, jerking him forward, and suddenly, the other figures began to move. their blank faces peeling back like paper, revealing empty sockets, hollow mouths. Mark yanked Jake back. "Run!" They fled. The corridor seemed to shift as they ran, stone folding in on itself, the walls narrowing. The pale figures pursued, not running but appearing, shifting closer every time the lights flickered. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly now, pulsing red. Ancient. Alive. And then they saw it. The door. A massive, rusted door set into the stone. Not wood this time. Metal. Bolted shut from the inside. Jake staggered forward, slamming his fists against it. "Let us out! Let us out!" The pale figures gathered just beyond the flickering light, watching. Silent. Waiting. Then, a voice. Not Ashley's. Not the figures. Something beneath the walls. "You brought them back, you opened the door, we are awake." The door groaned as the bolts shifted. The stone trembled. Mark screamed, "What does it mean? Who are you?" A single whisper. "We were the patients, now we are the cure." The door burst open. Blinding white light. And then... darkness. Silence. The footage from Jake's camera was recovered a week later. No bodies. Only the sound of breathing. And Ashley's voice. "Help me. I'm still here."